Welcome back. Well, in the first half of tonight's debate, we talked about the politics of dismantling the Calais migrant camp. French government hoping the operation, which got underway this morning, will provide a lasting solution. The sight of people living in desperate conditions in northern France in a bid to reach the UK is one that's existed for years. It's long been the cause of friction between politicians on both sides of the Channel and between Paris and London. France 24 Sanam Chantiai takes a look back at the Calais question.
1998, the year the first migrant camp appeared in Calais following the outbreak of war in Kosovo. For the 30-strong group, their promised land, England, was only across the Channel, marking the beginning of a long and arduous chapter in Calais' history. 1999 saw the opening of a refugee camp on the northern coast of Sangatte. The centre became home to Afghans, Iranians and Kurds, amongst others. The camp was designed to hold 900 refugees, but it was soon overflowing. By 2002, the authorities took matters into their own hands.
We'll give an identity card to each person, and once we've taken account of everyone here, we will stop taking people in.
And the new arrivals were denied access. By 2002, in a bid to stem the flow of illegal immigrants crossing the Channel, Sangatte was demolished. The migrants relocated to a makeshift camp in the woods near an industrial area which became known as the jungle.
I'm not an animal. Animals live in jungle.
For would-be asylum seekers, this became home, and many continued to herd into the unsafe, unsanitary camps. But by September 2009, to the sound of clashes and in front of the world's media, the area was cleared.
Our objective was not to round up the greatest possible number of migrants by surprising them at dawn, but to destroy the continuous flow of trafficked human beings.
With nowhere to go, the camp dwellers were forced to settle in squats and makeshift shelters scattered throughout Calais. Some were even sleeping in the streets. Faced with the humanitarian problem in 2014, France's Interior Minister announced the creation of a new centre.
No migrant should be without shelter when temperatures drop this low.
But since, migrants have continued to pour into Calais. In March 2016, following clashes, the southern section of the jungle was demolished. And by September, authorities announced the permanent closure of what's currently home to some 7,000 migrants.
That's a short history of the migrant situation in Calais. With me are Shoshana Fine, Research Associate at Sciences Po. Here in Paris, Mary Martin, who's a Migration and Asylum Programme Officer with Euromed Rights. And we are also in the presence from Strasbourg of UKIP MEP Tim Aker. Mr Aker, as you may have heard in that report there, the migrant issue in Calais is not a new one. There have been various solutions that have been tried over the year, including the Sangatte camp. Ultimately, if people do start to collect in Calais again, nobody wants another jungle. There will, in all likelihood, be some kind of humanitarian, more charity-oriented setup like that, and the situation is not going to change as long as the border situation with the UK is the same.
Well, the problem isn't just in France, it's across the whole of the European Union. When Angela Merkel said, come ye, the whole of the European Union was faced with a complete wave. I mean, look at the recent referendum in Hungary over the migrant deal and some would say the refugee deal there. This is a question about border controls. It's a question about, well, and certainly in the United Kingdom, soft touch Britain, of course. You know, Britain has always been a hospitable, welcoming country. And before, it was funny that video you showed said it started in 1998. Well, that was Tony Blair and his New Labour project, which set off the mass immigration policy that the British people fundamentally rejected on June the 23rd. Other countries across the European Union have got to look at this project and decide whether they're better off in it, where their borders are porous, where this will be a yearly, annual cycle. In the warm months, people will come, and in the cold months, people will be in incredibly bad situations, and you've got to stop the pull factors. And if you don't address the pull factors, then you're going to put a lot of people in harm's way. So this is a question way above France's level. It's across the whole European Union. They've got to say, right, we've got to have proper border controls. We've got to have nation states re-implementing their border controls, or this is going to continue. And the only way to do that, the only way to do it is for individual nation states in the European Union to have their referendums and to become free, independent states once again.
Tim Akers, thanks very much. Shoshana, is that the way to do it?
I mean, absolutely not. And I think he's having no understanding of human rights law, of the various conventions that Europe has signed, of British human rights law. I mean, basically, what he is proposing is that we block any kind of outsider to come and make a claim for asylum. So it's just basically completely... It would go completely against what are supposed to be the founding values of Europe. You know, Europe is supposed to be based on certain democratic values, and basically, I think he's trying to propose that we reinvent a different kind of Europe that is very undemocratic, and I find that very shocking.
Okay, Marie, I want to come back to a point I made just now, and as we saw in that report, there is a real cyclical nature to all of this. If migrants do, as we expect, once again start up turning up in Calais, it's going to be very difficult for people to say, let's have another jungle. It's going to be, we need something more in line with international humanitarian standards, like Sangatte.
Well, we might want to think differently about mobility, and that might be a good way to think about it. I'm afraid the notion of German are not that well known in Strasbourg, apparently, because that's not what Angela Merkel said. She didn't say, come here, come here. She said, we can make it. We can make it.
Do this.
We can do that, yeah. Which makes, well, actually, in a sense, which means
neither
that,
Britain nor France has said that, however.
No, but that means, well, she insisted on the we, which in fact ended up in a pretty much lonely kind of statement of hers. But and sadly speaking, because there's been no policy making collectively to address a challenge, because it's true, mobility is a challenge and maybe should be managed, but not in the way we do that. I mean, you can't thwart people reaching their rights. I mean, they will take them if they can't gain them, because, as you mentioned, they have human rights and they're supposed to be recognized then by the state as an obligation. Then when it comes to border control, the Schengen Borders Code actually provides already for the reinstallment of internal border control when facing some specific issues or specific events, like a sports event. So it's absolutely wrong to say that we're completely having porous borders, that this is not possible, and this is not bringing the debate up to the level that we have now, which is, if the people want to go to the UK, why do they want to go to the UK? It's not just a matter of pull factors, and I'm afraid to say so. It's also a matter of push factors. And France, the UK, and a number of big powers in the world count as many as the big players in arms trades, for instance, or when you think about the conflict, international wars. This is no reason why, I mean, this is a very good reason why people are on the move. I mean, we're talking about who Afghanis, Sudanese, Eritreans, Somali. These are people who are actually escaping conflict. So you can't just deny them their rights. Okay,
François Gamen, migration governance specialist, I'm going to bring you in now. Marie touched on it a bit there. The problem really, however, is that the United Kingdom has never been in Schengen and is even less so now.
Well, I would say that the problem is that the border between the UK and France is completely closed, and there are many people who would like to go into the UK. So what the UK politicians said was just basic nonsense. The very reason why these situations happen is because the borders are closed. That's the reason why there are 10,000 people living in miserable conditions in Calais. That's also the reason why there are 11 people every day dying in the Mediterranean. This is exactly because borders are closed that these situations happen. And clearly the migrants Calais are the victims of an absence, of a lack of joint policy on migration and asylum between France and the UK, in the similar fashion that all the migrants trying to cross the Mediterranean today are also the victims of the absence of a common asylum and migration policy in the EU. So it's certainly not by closing the borders or by isolating countries from each other that this will solve this problem in any case.
But the most recent development, of course, is Brexit, which is likely in the short to medium term to mean not borders becoming more open, but borders becoming more closed.
I mean, the idea of Brexit was that the UK would regain control over its borders. The situation in Calais shows that Britain has never abandoned control over its borders. It's absolutely false to say that there is no control on borders. These borders are completely closed at the moment. That's the reason why we have humanitarian situations like the one in Calais. That's the reason why 11 people a day are dying in the Mediterranean.
Thanks very much, François. We're coming back to you shortly. We were talking there about closed borders, specifically the British border. One of the complaints from a number of French politicians is that the current situation is effectively one which obliges France to act as the UK's border guard. That all goes back to the Le Touquet agreement of 2003. You can see one of the French presidential candidates, Nicolas Sarkozy, he's one of several who've spoken out on this issue, effectively saying that this agreement needs to be renegotiated, that the asylum claim should be processed on UK soil, that France can no longer, as I said, act as the UK's border policeman. Sarkozy is, however, let's not forget the man who signed that agreement back in 2003, but he's nevertheless said that if elected, he will go to London the day after to renegotiate. I'd like to bring in Tim Akers now. We were talking just now about Brexit. That's perhaps one element to take into account in future negotiations. I guess you would argue that Brexit was about, as you said earlier, taking back control of your country, taking back control of your borders. Is it therefore acceptable to have France acting as your nightclub bouncer?
Well, then France has got to have conversations with other countries that border it, because these migrants are turning, as your colleague said earlier, turning up in Greece and Italy. Maybe they should have a word with them. The point is, we've got a culture in the European Union where if you come on any part of it, you have complete and utter free movement. What we did in the United Kingdom was say no to this. And other countries should follow suit, or this is going to happen time and again and again. And I can't believe it. You've got people on this panel who say that, oh, Britain has a closed border. Are you joking, mate? We've got net immigration at 300,000 plus. That is not a managed immigration system. 20, 25
in terms of the
ago,
migrants in Calais, however, that border is very definitely closed.
50,000.
In terms of the border at Calais,
and jolly well
it's closed.
And jolly well it should be, because a Prime Minister that opens up that border will not be a Prime Minister for long. Let me tell you that. They will not be a Prime Minister for long. The British people voted for British borders to be under British control, and that is what we are going to get. And 17.4 million people toppled a Prime Minister who sneered down at people who wanted immigration controls, who sneered down his nose at people that wanted to take back control of their country. It was a very British coup. And the message we will send to other European Union countries is ignore your establishment, ignore the so-called experts that are on the panel that tell you what's good for you. You know what's good for you. Demand your own referendums and take back control of your own countries, because this is the only way we're going to be able to stop these
Tim
awful
Akers, we're going to have
happening.
to leave that one there. Thanks very much. We understand your calls for referendums across Europe, re-establishment of border control, etc. What we were originally talking about there, Shoshana, really is that France did kind of get had by that deal back in 2003.
I mean, just quickly to respond to his comments, because they really were quite frustrating. I mean, with Brexit, Britain didn't bring back control of its borders. Britain was never a part of Schengen. Britain always controlled its borders. And you were very much mixing up labour migration with asylum, which are really two different categories. So basically, there are almost no legal ways for asylum seekers to make a claim for asylum in the UK. There are some very small quotas for resettlement of refugees from the EU and from outside of the EU. So it is almost impossible for an asylum seeker to legitimately, legally make a claim for asylum in the UK. Now, all we've got, you're saying that Britain is some kind of soft touch. All that they're basically doing is say, OK, we'll welcome some minors. What have we seen? We've seen about 300 minors, I think, so far. You know, we've seen very small numbers. And this is also, I think, very problematic. Of course, Britain should be welcoming these minors. You know, I think a lot of these people, legally, they have rights to family reunification in the UK. So this is, legally speaking, they have absolute right to be there. But I think what is problematic about this discourse is that it's relying on this humanitarian notion of generosity. So basically, rather than seeing these people, not only the vulnerable populations, not only the children, not only the women, but also the men, you know, refugees, they're all vulnerable. And they should all have a right to make asylum in a country in which they want to.
Tim Akers, you look like you wish to respond.
Well, no, you talk about generosity. I've got 7,000 people on the council house waiting list in Thurrock. I've got people in my ward in Averley that have to wait 4 weeks for a GP appointment. We have seen the consequences of mass immigration, whatever colour you want or shape you want to describe.
This is not the consequences of mass immigration.
We have seen that affect hard-working British taxpayers, and enough is enough. And the only way this is going to be done is for France to have its own referendum and seek its own proper border controls. And you might more to throw into the mix as well. How about we actually stop stop bombing these countries and actually stop creating the cause for people to flee their homelands. Look at Libya and the disastrous policy there. Look at the history of chaos in the Middle East by Bush and Blair.
The UK has the resources
Why don't we
to
actually
welcome
stop
these people.
bombing these places?
Absolutely.
Well, you say that. We have to build a house once every 4 minutes, day and night, to house current levels of migration in the United Kingdom. House prices are going through the roof. Rents are going through the roof.
I wonder where this figure...
Social
Rents
housing
are not
is
going through the
incredibly
roof
short
because of
supply.
migration. I think you're mixing up very different things and making a very confusing, unscientific argument.
Maybe you want to learn about supply and demand a bit.
Guys, we're going to leave that section of the debate there. In the end, this is also, as we said earlier on, it's about... It's a crisis within a crisis. We're talking about relatively small numbers of migrants in Calais compared to the number who've come into the European Union. You were talking earlier about the German response, one which you presumably admire. I guess you think that neither Britain nor France have done particularly well.
Yeah, well, we're not saying we admire that solution because it may have been a little chaotic to do it at once and open borders it were done, but it was kind of taking a leadership politically on a very interesting issue. And nobody wants to hear what a number of academic researchers, some politicians as well, have been saying for years now, that looking at mobility differently, maybe free movement, could be a very good alternative, because when we think about it, maybe in 100 or 200 years from now, people will look at our time as a very awkward time when we were closing borders, where everyone wanted to be specifically attached to one territory, when in fact we know that mobility is profitable to people's human rights, to economy, to a number of things. So it's very strange to see that all this energy, money as well, when we talk about economy, is diverted to controlling borders, which in fact are at the time the tightest level as they've ever been. So maybe to think differently about these issues in a constructive manners will be politically very good.
François, I want to bring you back in now. Thinking differently about the issue, if we keep that issue now to the problems in Calais, what new thinking is there?
What strikes me is the impossibility to discuss of these issues rationally. I mean, and when you have the racist guy from UKIP that you had on air minutes ago, I'm sorry to say, but as an academic and as a researcher on these issues, just a bunch of lies and nonsense and confusing facts and figures and pitting people against each other. It's just racist, populist, xenophobic propaganda. What I'm trying to say is that we should try and have a rational, pragmatic discourse of these issues. And the first thing to do will be to realize that borders do not prevent migration. It only makes migration more difficult and more deadly. And the moment we realize this, the moment we accept that migration is now a structural phenomenon of the 21st century, whether you like it or not, then we can come to accept it as a reality and try to deal with it pragmatically, leaving apart this obsession with closed borders, which is deadly. I'm sorry to say, I'm sorry to put it this way, this is the reason people die when they try to cross the Mediterranean or the Channel for that matter. In terms of Calais, what pragmatically could be done to improve the situation, given that it's pretty clear that that border is and will remain shut? France is acting as the nightclub bouncer of the UK. And the problem is that the 2K agreements are deeply unbalanced because basically the UK doesn't want to deal with the issue. So it's putting France in charge of the issue. I think that the first thing that needs to happen for Calais is that this is what's happening at the moment, that a lot of people need to find asylum in France. And those who need to be reunited with their families in the UK should be, and those who want to apply for asylum in the UK should be entitled to apply for asylum in the UK. This is a basic right guaranteed by the 1951 Geneva Convention. Tim Aker, it sounds like several voices in France think that agreement is unfair and should be renegotiated.
Well, that man needs to apologise to me first for his ridiculous comments. I've been talking about border controls, and he has been talking about something completely different and making wild accusations. And that sort of elitist arrogance from that man that we've been having in the United Kingdom for the past 12 years, which is why Britain voted to leave the European Union. And so if you want to go and call anyone in France who wants proper border controls a racist, you will actually get a nation of France who will vote to leave the European Union. So you keep doing what you do. keep on with the same establishment rubbish, because we've seen it in the United Kingdom, we've heard it before, and people voted against it. I don't care if you call yourself an academic. You wouldn't be fit to teach in a British university with that sort of ridiculous logic you've got by equating border controls to racism. You need to go back to school, mate.
Tim Akers. It's a fairly vehement opinion on François' solution, but it does, in the end, perhaps Le Touquet will end up having to go.
Yeah, and I just think, I will get to that in 1 second, I just think it's just important coming back to the representative from UKIP who earlier kept speaking about the British people, the interests of the British people. Well, I'd just like to add that I'm a British citizen and he's certainly not speaking in my name. And yes, no, I agree, it does need to be renegotiated. Britain does need to be taking more responsibility for these.
The majority voted to leave.
I think it does need to be renegotiated. I think that Britain certainly, as I was mentioning before, needs to go beyond just accepting the most vulnerable, accepting a small amount of minors, but needs to play a part in this situation and needs to share solidarity with other European countries and beyond. This is not just a British problem. It's not just a French problem. It's a international. It's a global problem. It's a European problem. We need to see some solidarity here, and I think that's the only way that we're going to see some kind of a solution to this crisis.
Finally, Marie, again, I'm trying to get it back to the specifics of Calais. It looks like there's going to be more and more pressure for the Le Touquet agreement to change, particularly from the...
First of all, I'd like to make clear that there's no way it's going to be politically a good idea to oppose the excluded in society, as our MEP from the UKIP just did, and a number of populists throughout Europe and the world too.
Another one putting words in my mouth.
So
words in my mouth.
I'm very sorry to say that unemployment and a number of people not having access to healthcare or GP is a complete structural issue that's not specific to Britain, by the way. You may have to think about a true political programme when it comes to the welfare state rather than pushing and shifting the blame onto migrants and refugees. The second, in relation to Calais, is probably that the reception means are not adequate. And here we need to think about a real Marshall Plan when it comes to accommodating people, receiving people, maybe not just for migrants and refugees, but a big accommodation plan when it comes to those being excluded in society. And I think that's the biggest challenge ahead in society, trying to make people not compete against each other, but really truly build society together in recognition of how diversity can be beneficial to society.
Marie, Shoshana, Tim and François, thanks very much. That's all we have time for on the France 24 debate. Time now for Media Watch. James Creedon is with us and Calais leading the news today.
Absolutely. So look, first of all, at some reactions from the media and from the public that are more sympathetic to the plight of these refugees and migrants. Starting with Le Monde, where this quote has been put up as their headline. With this evacuation, the eyes of the world are on France. That's, I think, the least we can say. Plantu, the cartoonist for Le Monde, his take on it is, I suppose, picking up on the potential for this to be viewed very negatively in terms of the French state just dismantling this camp and the situation that puts some migrants in. And I think, ironically, on the side of that bus there, you can see "Welcome to France, bienvenue en France." And actually, another stroke of irony, you could say, is one of the buses that was being used to transport these migrants, owned by a private company, had on the side of it, "Au bout de vos rêves," or at the end of your dreams, or following your dreams. And I suppose that's quite ironic, because I think for most of these migrants or refugees, this is not necessarily what they want or where they want to go. A lot of journalists, including one of our own journalist, Tony Todd, tweeting the map that was used to provide the residents of Calais with, or of the camp, with a choice as to which region they would go to. And indeed, they were given colour-coded armbands in order to, I suppose, sort through the various different individuals who were being sent to different parts of the country. Angélique Chrysafis for The Guardian spoke of one man, a lone Sudanese man who doesn't know France, picks Normandy on a map and gets a blue wristband. So I suppose some people relaying those details in a slightly melancholic way, also pointing to, and also Angelique Christophe with a photo of these 4 men with a board game, which I suppose indicated that they wanted to end up in the UK, but that's not where they will be going, many of them. So just to finish with 2 more tweets that are quite sympathetic. Just for a moment, feel the pain of your home being in a bag, moving continuously, no security, constant fear, just heartbreaking. And another Twitter user saying that he would actually like to be able to help these individuals, but he is very far away. So some sympathy coming across on social media, Chris.
But not all reactions, alas, that sympathetic.
Certainly not. And Le Journal du Dimanche is cataloguing some of the different regions in France which have been anything but sympathetic. Indeed, in Calais, which is a town near Grenoble, the local administration wanted a referendum. One sec, that's not the right article. Here it is. And that was refused or overruled by a local court. Elsewhere, there have been incidents as well of centres being torched, and local administrations, saying that they just didn't want any migrants in their region. That's Laurent Wauquiez, who is the deputy leader of the opposition Les Républicains party. Meanwhile, you do have other reports, such as in the newspaper Sud-Ouest, saying that in fact record levels of money have been collected in anticipation of migrants arriving in their region. So it's not a black or white scenario. But yes, there is a lot of negative comment on social media. For example, the reality of Syrian refugee women and children, and clearly they are not Syrians, but no one said that all of the residents of the jungle camp were Syrians. So certainly there is a certain amount of negative comment, and false images also doing the rounds of social media depicting the migrants being dispersed across the country in this manner. And indeed, that was the article I was showing earlier, BuzzFeed pointing to the fact that a lot of these images are fake or faux.
James, thanks very much.
Thanks, Chris.
That's what we have time for on Media Watch. Do stay with us. Live from Paris continues after this short break.